When the Buddha started to wander around India shortly after his enlightenment, he encountered several people who recognized him to obviously be a very extraordinary being. And the story goes like this. They asked him, "Are you a god?" "No," he replied. "Are you a reincarnation of God?" "No." "How about a wizard, then?" "No." "A human?" "No." "So what are you?" they asked, very perplexed. The Buddha simply replied, "I am awake." Buddha means the awakened one. And how to awaken is all he taught. I am awake. Theology that gets us to awake just feels like the good stuff for me. We humans, we fall asleep consistently, don't we? It might be deduced that the spiritual path and all its wonderful and varied offshoots is what we choose to help us wake up. To awaken, in my book, is simply to learn the art of living. Now, as I considered this over the past couple of weeks, one of my favorite TED Talks came to mind. You all like TED Talks? Yeah. It is one of the most contemporary example of the Buddha and I am awake that I could muster. So this one is just such a favorite of mine. In 2008, Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, she offered a talk called My Stroke of Insight. Maybe some of you have seen it. To date, it's been clicked on over 29 million times, so I'm guessing that at least some of you have in fact watched it or listened to it. So Dr. Taylor is a highly accomplished, celebrated brain scientist who had a massive stroke and in real time watched her brain's functions, motion, speech, and most importantly, self-awareness completely disappear. And her ability, of course, to understand what was happening in her brain in real time and tell about it as a brain scientist makes this TED Talk just sublime. If you're someone who likes homework assignments, you've got one now. So before I give you the abridged version and can fully grasp what happened to her during this stroke, you need to have a basic understanding of what the left and right hemispheres of the brain do. So I'm pulling from how she quickly lays this out. So our right hemisphere is all about this present moment, here and now. And it thinks in pictures. Information comes into this side of the brain really in the form of energy through our sensory systems. And then it explodes into an enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, smells like, tastes like, feels like, sounds like. And one does not need to have all of these senses working in order for the right hemisphere to know that we are energy beings, and these are her words, energy beings connected to the energy all around us, one human energy family. That's the right hemisphere side. Connected in our right hemispheres, each of us perfect and whole and beautiful And those are Dr. Taylor's words. Now, the left hemisphere is a very different place. This side thinks linearly and methodically. It's all about the past, and it's all about the future. It's, quote, designed to take that enormous collage of the present, all that energy, and start picking out the details and more details about those details. And then it categorizes and organizes all that information and associates it with everything in the past that we have ever learned and projects it into the future, all the possibilities and outcomes. It's also our language place, right? This is the side where all the ongoing brain chatter takes place. The right hemisphere is a place of we are. The left hemisphere is a place of I am, more or less, simply put, very simply put. Now, Dr. Taylor says, as soon as my left hemisphere says to me, I am, I become separate. I become a single, solid individual, separate from the energy flow around me and consequently separate from you. And it was this side of her brain, the left side, that Dr. Taylor lost on the day of her massive stroke, a day that she describes as an experience of living completely out of my right hemisphere, where the boundaries of my singular body could no longer be defined, and I felt at one with all the energy around me. She said she felt enormous and expansive, and this was coupled, get this, with a complete silencing of that left brain chatter, like suddenly someone pressed a mute button. And with this silencing, all stress from her day-to-day life disappeared. Imagine, she says, imagine all of the relationships in the external world and any stressors related to any of those gone. And imagine what it would feel like to lose 37 years, that was the age that she was during the stroke, to lose 37 years of emotional baggage. And here she says, oh, I felt euphoria. Euphoria. It was beautiful. Now, of course, a massive stroke is awful. For her, it was a near-death experience that took nearly 8 years to fully recover from. And she also describes it as nirvana, both. She says, I realized what a tremendous gift this experience could be, what a stroke of insight this could be to how we live our lives. I pictured a world filled with beautiful, compassionate, loving people who knew that they could purposely choose to move to the right of their left hemispheres and find peace. It was this insight that motivated me to recover, she says. So this was her I am awake experience. And make no mistake, we don't need to have a stroke or banish the left hemispheres of our brains to take in this wisdom teaching. The telling, don't you love the words of our poet today? The telling of her story is simply an invitation to choose moving to the right from time to time. Now, the hope of this church and this sanctuary, the way I see it, the connections we build and nurture here is this choice. Worship, prayer, music. These are just a few invitational places around here to move to the right, where hopefully the chatter quiets, the emotional baggage lightens, and you feel expanded and connected to something bigger, beyond the bounds of yourself. And of course, when we feel this, we are better able to be awake to the world that surrounds us, right? Be vessels of peace, compassion, love, and because of this, better able to be awake to the experiences of others. I am so grateful to David Morrison, not just for being willing to share his experience as a person who he calls himself as to be legally blind or low-visioned, as Martha says. Not just that, but for being willing to point out what we as sighted people miss. Which way doors swing, open and closed, the level of hand dryers in our bathrooms, how show and tell moments in, say, worship so often exclude those who can't see. How much we sighted folks, this is something David has shared with me, how much we love wordage and the assumptions we make when emails go out, or flyers are hung, or lawn signs are staked in the ground. I consistently pass by this stuff all the time. And I'm trying to do better. And I'm grateful to David for bravely pointing this out. And I'm also grateful that our Unitarian-Universalist faith has begun to more deeply engage with and center disability rights activism. They are now offering us a wealth of resources and recommendations and modeling how to do this better, so that we aren't just relying on those with disabilities to point this stuff out to us. At our General Assembly last spring, I don't know if some of you know this, but every speaker in worship and beyond, every workshop we held, not only would introduce themselves and speak their pronouns, but they would also say a few words to describe themselves. I am a middle-aged white woman with reddish-brown hair. I've got cute dangly earrings on today, a black ministerial robe, and my favorite color of red stole, which kind of sort of matches my lipstick. I had never experienced anything like that before. And it had never occurred to me how better welcoming it is to those who either couldn't see, can't see, or whose cognitive disability prevented them from being able to discern these descriptors. It foments a two-way street of connection, don't you think? That is the spirit of it. Helps us better expand out beyond our boundaries, our singular experiences. Shimmy over to the right. When it comes to disability activism, we have to first get that there is a kaleidoscope of disabilities in our midst. Those that might seem obvious, and mainly those that aren't. We call these invisible disabilities, like chronic pain or chronic fatigue, epilepsy, ADHD, learning disabilities, autism, to name a few. Take this in. Globally, 1 out of 7 people live with a disability, and 90% of them are invisible. Wow is right. So this certainly gives one pause before making assumptions about what a person say should look like if they are parking in an accessibility space. In fact, right now there is a movement among disability activists to change the commonly used person in wheelchair symbol to something else, for not everyone who has a disability and needs accessibility accommodations is in a wheelchair. Wow. Dismantling oppression, which is what we are all about, my dear friends, is a daily spiritual practice of waking up to and challenging assumptions like this. And one of the greatest harms that we unintentionally, I use that word a lot, the unintentional acts and harms on those with disabilities is perpetuating what theologian Thomas Reynolds calls the cult of normalcy. Oh, that's good. The cult of normalcy. This is the societal construct that brands certain kinds of bodies and minds as quote unquote normal, right? And this normalcy is what is centered when we design buildings and structure institutions, interact with one another, and yes, even lead worship and do church. And coupled with this assumption of how normal people move through space and interact is the utterly outdated and harmful thinking that body and mind normalcy is the ideal, right? And should be achieved and aspired to by all. Yeah. The tomes of bad theology about healing and curing and all the ableist hermeneutics that reinscribe this cult of normalcy has certainly not helped. No. So the liberational theology, as I'm going to now call it for myself at least, that our right hemisphere offers us around we are, the I'm awake to we are, unveils the infinite particularities of beings, diverse in body and mind and experience and identity. Not so that we better tolerate it or accommodate for it, but so that we're more expanded by it. This is the euphoria Dr. Taylor shared about when the boundary of self disintegrates. Theologian and writer Henry Nouwen calls this kind of euphoric we are expansion hospitality. Hospitality, whose true meaning, he says, is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. It is not to bring people over to our side, but to offer freedom not disturbed by dividing lines. It is not to lead our neighbor into a corner where there are no alternatives left, but to open a wide spectrum of options for choice and commitment. It is not a method of making our God and our way into the criteria of happiness, but the opening of an opportunity to others to find their God and their way. Hospitality wants to create a friendly emptiness where every human being can enter and discover themselves as created free, unbound. And you, the good people of First Parish of Watertown, have for a long time been trying for this kind of hospitality. Some of you shared with me yesterday at the annual appeal lunch that you launched, get this, you launched an accessibility campaign back in the early 90s when membership numbers were way down and money was tight, and for some, anxieties about this church's survival were in the air, when it would have been easy to become stingy And it would have been easy to become small-minded, but instead you became generous and big-minded, and you creatively raised the money to make changes to this building, building an accessibility ramp, adding an elevator as an outward sign of welcome and hospitality, and you literally moved to the right, removed barriers, and by doing this, grew, literally expanded in membership and in wealth. It was this that one of you said yesterday to me, saved us. Wow, right? At the end of Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor's TED Talk, she said this. So who are we? We are the life force power of the universe. And we have the power to choose moment by moment who and how we want to be in the world. Right here, right now, I can move into the consciousness of my right hemisphere where we are at one with all that is. Or I can choose to move into the consciousness of my left hemisphere where I become a single individual, a solid, separate from the flow, separate from you. Which would you choose? She asks, which do you choose? And when? And when? And these are her closing words. I believe that the more time we spend choosing to run the deep inner peace circuitry of our right hemispheres, the more peace we will project into the world and the more peaceful our planet will be. And this is a story worth telling, she says. And so, may we continue to wake up to the stories of others, their brave tellings, as our poet writes. May we continue to make space to receive these tellings, be changed, transformed by them. May we continue to tell our stories. May we better lean on one another, be good hosts to one another. May we choose and choose and choose again to expand to the blessings of we are, the deep inner peace circuitry of our right hemispheres. I am awake. Together, we are awake in community. And those are David Morrison's closing words on every email he sends me. We are awake in community. And so I say to you, may it be so, and amen.